Greetings, dear reader. I am Erik Eldritch, and today we'll be reading my book, Don't Worry, I Won't Be Long, The Tale of Greypelt and the Thieves of Reggio. Not long after this, Drudo's messenger finally arrived at the tavern. Ferrante was no less than Drudo's second-in-command, high profile for the likes of Andronikos and Anatoli. But if the Panati was speaking truth about the Carnelian swan, it did deserve the utmost attention. Ferrante had waited to see if the summer rain would let up, and thus arrived later than arranged, but neither thieves nor Calabrians were sticklers for punctuality in the first place. The enforcer was familiar with the tavern that Andronikos had selected for the meeting, as it was a common hangout for members of the Thief Guild. He was already unbuckling his sword in order to hand it over when he got to the door, and was surprised when there was no one to take it as he entered. A quick inspection revealed that the doorman was slumped down next to the entrance with one of the barmaids checking him for a concussion. Ferrante scanned the room for answers and saw several reproductions of this scene, but starring some of Reggio's burliest citizens, some with even more gruesome wounds. Even the owner had not escaped this violence. His own wife cradled him softly in the center of the building. Anyone not tending to the wounded was kneeling in prayer, either for the sake of the victims or for their own protection against whatever storm had crashed into this place. "What happened here?" Ferrante called out to whoever might answer. A few of the patrons looked anxiously at the well-dressed man, fearing that he was some noble here to round up riffraff, but they relaxed when they recognized a member of their neighborhood thief guild. These simple folk had nothing to steal and thus nothing to fear. If anything, they were more likely to earn a small coin from the guild here or there for offering up information or distractions. "Oh, it is you, Ferrante," one of the owner's young sons addressed him. "An unholy beast has fallen upon us. A mighty she-wolf as gray as Jupiter's thunderclouds and who strikes with the ferocity of his lightning." A loose wolf did this. Ferrante was puzzled. Real wolves were not so big and bad as this, and if one had attacked, it would have left bites, not concussions. "The boy doesn't know his legends, guildsman," an older patron entered the conversation. "That was no wolf, boy. That was a cynocephalus, a doghead. They live in the savage corners of the world and are known by many names. Sinbin in Britannia, Itbarak among the Turks, and Halfundingas to the Varangi. Whenever I heard of them in my travels, they are known as fearsome warriors that cannot be slain except by heaven's intervention. They are the hounds of Orcus, sent to punish us for our sins and hubris." Ferrante listened patiently. Drudo was fond of employing demi-humans, and his thieves knew better than to assign divine wrath to people who simply used their natural gifts to stand out in the human world. He could imagine one of the guild's centaurs causing a mess like this, but he was impressed to learn that the dog-headed Amazon had come out of this encounter completely unscathed. Still, Ferrante couldn't help but wonder if that spoke more to the quality of the tavern's drinks than to the stranger's skill. "That Panati, Andronikos, was he here?" Ferrante interrupted, remembering the business he was really here for. "Ah, yes, Ferrante, he was one of yours, wasn't he?" another patron chimed in. "I was near them before the battle began. It seems the demon dog had come for him specifically. She tried to drag him off before the fight started, and she only stopped her rampage to run after the little long-ears when he fled. It's his sins that the she-devil was sent here to punish. She must have dragged him off to hell by now." Ferrante was troubled by this, and continued gathering witness statements for a bit. The enforcer estimated that it was not the supernatural underworld that they needed to fear, but the criminal underworld that was behind this. Some other criminal syndicate was trying to worm its way into Drudo's turf. And if they were starting their campaign with the Carnelian swan, they were starting big. Drudo must be alerted right away. The Thief Guild's second-in-command took his leave of the terrorized tavern and considered his options. His instinct was to take up the trail of the cynocephalus and hope that she would betray the location of her organization by returning there. Unfortunately, in the rainy night, there were no witnesses in the streets to have seen where she went. A few of the tavern patrons had looked out the windows after her, but their drinks and superstitions must have muddled their eyesight, as they only recounted a vision of some hellish dragon under the Amazon's command swallowing up the little Panati and vanishing into the night. No, the trail was already cold. The sensible course was to report this to Drudo at once. Then the information network could begin to reach out its tendrils and tell them what they needed. Ferrante dreaded bringing bad news to Drudo, but he'd rather do it himself than risk anyone else's hide. The leader of the Thief Guild was a mountain of a man and prone to go volcano at the slightest irritation. The fellow's family history claimed that their clan were descendants of the primordial Gigantes, and no one in Reggio had any evidence against it. But for some reason, the dutiful deputy had a way of soothing Drudo's nerves, as much as a mystery to himself as to anyone else. If anyone was going to break it to the boss and come out intact, it would have to be Ferrante. Ah, Ferrante, my favorite. Drudo welcomed his second-in-command himself as soon as he returned to the hideout. Come in, come in. Come dry yourself by the fire and tell me all that you have learned. Ferrante measured his tone carefully. My lord, please sit down before we discuss it, and calm your nerves. You mustn't work yourself up into such fervor. Right you are, my friend, the giant conceded, though a needle of suspicion was beginning to work its way into his mind. The other thieves in the hideout made way for their two bosses, who seated themselves down upon the cushions and blankets laid out in front of the hideout's hearth. Ferrante peeled off his rain-soaked shirt and wrapped a warm blanket around himself while Drudo poured them each a cup of caudle that had been warming up in the fire. At last, the lieutenant could no longer stall. Master Drudo, it seems that a storm is brewing over Reggio, and I don't mean the rain. Andronikos Anatoly was abducted before I ever arrived. What? The mountainous man exploded to his feet with incredible speed. By who? Who would dare defy the thieves of Reggio? That's just it, my lord. She seems to have been a foreigner, Ferrante replied calmly. She? Drudo's curiosity overtook his anger as Ferrante recounted what he had gathered from the tavern-goers. His lieutenant's smooth tones calmed his nerves enough to hear the tale, but the master of these couldn't keep himself from stalking back and forth like a prowling predator as he listened. So, Drudo finally composed himself enough to speak. You think this is evidence of a rival guild, from Byzantium no less? It stands to reason, sir, Ferrante explained. Their new treaty with the Genovese has given both parties new trading opportunities, and where the business goes, the crime follows. Andronikos was speaking with her, they said. Drudo's own gears were turning. Suppose there is a simpler explanation. The Grey Devil is someone from the Penates past. Andronikos has hatched some plan to convince us he has stolen the carnelian spawn, and uses this so-called enemy to throw us off. He will ask us for payment, and then his dog will have dragged him off before the spawn can be handed over. Ferrante thought it over. Perhaps, sir, we cannot disprove any connection between the two. But if it were a stunt, was it not performed too soon? Andronikos didn't have a chance to arrange any payment with us. But you waited for the rain, did you not? And the men of the tavern forced her to fight. Perhaps his plan was spoiled by the wait. Drudo seemed keen to push this explanation, and though Ferrante's gut doubted the hunch, his mind had no argument against it. In any case, Master Drudo, we should proceed with open minds. All or none of our explanations might be true, and we should take no pride in plans built on the accounts of drunk and frightened tavern-goers. Quite right, as always, my friend. Drudo calmed himself noticeably. Our own eyes and ears should be our guides. You there! He turned to one of his thieves loitering near the doorway. Where is Grazia? We have work for her. As the minion went to find the guild's chief of information, Drudo turned back to Ferrante. I would be lost without you, friend. The giant put a hand on his lieutenant's bare shoulder and raised him to his feet. You are the moon in my sky. Without that gentle light, I'd be plunged into darkness. And you are our gleaming sun, Ferrante smiled back at him. Without our master, we thieves would be nothing but weeds. You have grown us into a beautiful garden. Drudo's face was already flushed from rage and caudle, but Ferrante imagined a slight blush upon the mountain's face as he was reminded of just how important the master of the guild was to all its thieves. Late-night business, Grazia greeted them. Some more entertaining salutations had jumped into her mind when she saw her two bosses, but the guild's chief of information knew better than to tease her volatile employer. She was another Panati, and like Andronikos, had found that her race's superb hearing was quite valuable in the toolkit of a criminal. But Grazia preferred to steal the intangible. Information was her business, and her network of spies and informants were essential to the Thief Guild's operations. Trudeau self-consciously abandoned his affectionate display and began explaining the situation. Ferrante's cool demeanor did not care what anyone thought of him, but he did busy himself finding a dry shirt to put on in the presence of a lady. An odd gesture to the Panati's mind, as she had done much of her early spy work in brothels, and there was nothing either of her bosses would be willing to do to each other that would affect her. But Trudeau had always insisted that Grazia be treated like the high-ranking member of the organization that she was today, not the rapscallion she had once been. Grazia pondered the news. Ferrante's theory seems less likely to me. If an outfit of Greeks or Genovese had been worming its way into the city, they've been extraordinarily quiet. But I feel I know Andronikos. He adores you, Trudeau. To make a move like this against you would be completely out of character. He is a thief, after all, Trudeau responded. Deception is part of the skill set. But if he's as loyal as you say, we must make his rescue all the more urgent. Put your spies on high alert. Find out where this wolf woman came from and went to. Of course, sir. Andronikos woke up feeling sore. He felt the natural shock that one feels when coming back to consciousness in an unfamiliar place, and further shock at discovering his limbs were unmovable. But once his mind recovered enough to remember the night before, the situation made perfect sense. Greypelt, the cynocephalus, had hog-tied him, thrown him into her cart, and absconded into the night with her strange beast. In the dim light, Andronikos had noticed the same nocturnal gleam in the eyes of the grey devil as he had seen in her beast. As neither were bothered by the dark, the pair was accustomed to traveling by night and resting in the hot sunlight. Thus they wasted no time in the city of Reggio, and had embarked with their prisoner at once. Andronikos had tried to stay awake to follow their trail and possibly escape back to Reggio, but he had slept little the night before in the excitement of acquiring the carnelian swan, and the pitter-patter of rain and clunking of the cart had generated a hypnotic effect that swiftly swept him off to sleep. Andronikos deduced that it was now late morning. Yesterday's rain clouds were still loitering overhead, but patches of blue were fighting back for command of the sky. His canine captor had taken him to an old Roman ruin built by enslaved giants over 1,000 years ago. Such places were avoided by the local humans, who believed that they were haunted by spirits from the long-lost empire, or by monsters who had moved in to find seclusion. As Andronikos' eyes wandered to the great reptilian beast who had borne him here, it struck him that the superstition was quite justified. Seeing the alien archosaur in the vague shadows of night had been frightening, but seeing the beast in all the glory of full daylight was a new kind of fear. Its body was covered in bony reptilian scales, with a barrage of spiky protrusions down its back and horns atop its head. The beast's long neck hung low, and its eyes half-lidded as it catnapped in the midday sun. Andronikos remembered Greypelt's name for the beast, Latifa, meaning cutie, and shuddered to think of how deranged either her sensibilities or sense of humor must be to have come up with that. Speaking of the dog-headed devil, a low splash alerted Andronikos to her location. These ruins had once been a shrine or bathhouse built atop a natural Calabrian mineral spring that collected into a large stone pool. The water was deep enough for swimming, and the awe-inspiring Amazon was propelling herself at great speed from one end of the pool to the other. It was no surprise that her aquatic ability echoed the martial prowess she had displayed the night before. Looking at both the massive reptilian beast and its impressive canine master, Andronikos wondered which of them was more dangerous. But he did know which one he'd rather have his eye on, as the strange beauty of the cynocephalus continued to captivate him as it had the first time he had laid his eyes on her. Eventually, having grown born of her sport, the wolf-woman lifted herself out of the water, and Andronikos was shocked to see that she was utterly unclothed. The little thief wasn't sure if he should look away for fear of reprisal, or if he should honor the opportunity as a divine reprieve sent by the goddess Laverna in his hour of despair. Without the cloak and belts and rags to shroud her, the naked wolf-woman looked like one of nature's nymphs, straight out of Gaia's womb at the dawn of time. When humans cast off their clothes and tool, they looked unwhole, unfinished, and unsuited to the business of existence. This cynocephalus was the opposite in every way. The trappings of civilization did nothing to improve her. She only put up with proper etiquette to appease the humans while in their presence. When modern Calabria finally crumbled to dust, like the ancient Romans who had built this place, the dog-headed Amazon and her kind would simply wash themselves of the ephemeral frivolity and return to nature's ways, untouched by all the aimless ambitions of the old order. The careful canine had positioned her victim close to the bathing pool so that she could keep an eye on him. She shook the water from her fur and was about to lay in the sun to dry. When the wolf noticed that her prisoner was awake and staring at her, she walked over to him. The Panati seemed to flinch, refusing to look upon her naked body as she drew near. "You needn't be that way with me," Greypelt assured him. "My kind is never naked as long as we have our fur." Andronikos would beg to differ, but he decided that this was indeed a sign that Laverna had not forsaken him. "You've been with the humans too long. Your own people are the same way when they live in their own lands. They wear no clothing but their own ears." The statement put the Panati's gears to turning. Andronikos had been born into human custody back in Theodosia, far from his people's ancestral islands in the Aral Sea. All his life, the thought of visiting that far-off homeland had never crossed his mind. He had seen drawings of his people, covered only in leaves or loincloths and living out of doors, and they looked like hopeless wretches. The thief had always believed that his people were better for their contact with humanity, that he himself was better for it, especially his contact with the Thief Guild here in Drudo. But in the present company, it occurred to him that he had never really put those beliefs to the test. "Have you ever been there, to the Panati Islands?" Andronikos asked a bit absent-mindedly. "Not to the islands themselves, but I've seen them on the horizon when I walked the shores of the Aral Sea. You should ask if Vasiklo will be good enough to spread your remains there when he's done with you." The subject of travel and the devil dog's grim business snapped the Panati back to reality. "Wait, you don't intend to travel overland to Theodosia, do you? It's half the world away." The cynocephalus chuckled at the thought. "No, we aren't traveling any further than this. A Genovese merchant ship will stop by the port of Reggio on their way to Theodosia in 4 days' time. Assuming the sea has no surprises for them, of course. Then you'll be their problem until you're reunited with your master." "Then why not stay in the city?" Andronikos asked. His canine captor snorted at the suggestion. "You're the thief. Would you lay down to sleep in a vault you just burgled?" she countered. "Besides, human cities are never to my liking. They are so prudish about clothing and weapons, and they are always such bores to my dear Latifa." Like any pet, the great beast raised its sleepy lids and looked over at the sound of its name. Its master reassured it with another phrase in Arabic, and the monster returned to its daylight slumber. "What is that?" Andronikos stopped himself from being boorish to the strange animal. "That dear creature. Why do you speak Arabic to it?" "I speak Arabic to her because Arabic is what she knows. She is a Ninki Nanka from Mali. The Egyptians buy them as eggs and raise them in the Nile to be guardians and hunters. Her trainers taught me all the words she knows. Well, I say she, but I have never checked." The cynocephalus gave her pet a loving gaze as she explained its origins. The Panati thought it strange at first to not know the gender of one's own pet, but quickly realized that there were no obvious signs of it on the colossal crocodilian. He knew of the common method used to check the gender of young chickens, and only imagined what terrible wrath would befall anyone who dared investigate the mighty Ninki Nanka's cloaca. Suddenly, the wolfwoman's ears pricked up, and the rest of her snapped to attention after them. She lunged at Andronikos, and he feared that some primal instinct was about to compel her to sink her fangs into his neck, but she only forced her palm against his mouth to gag his voice. The long-eared Panati felt ashamed that the cynocephalus had identified the distant sound before he had, but he decided to attribute the failure to momentary stress and grogginess. Soon, Andronikos also detected and deciphered the sound that had alarmed his abductress, the beat of hooves traveling at a strong pace. By the thief's reckoning, they were not heading directly for the ruins, but apparently they were too close for the cynocephalus's comfort. He wondered if she could pick up the irregularity that his keen Panati hearing had identified. These weren't the hooves of a horse. The weight and timing was not right. This was the telltale beat of a centaur. And if Laverna was smiling upon the thief, it would be one of the centaurs in Drudo's employ. Time slowed to a crawl as the huntress and her prey waited and listened to the path of the intruder. Latifa grew curious at the sudden silence and looked to its master for guidance. Greypelt gave her companion a silent hand signal, and the huge creature slunk into the pool of water with impossible stealth. Still, the beat of hooves grew closer. The ruins were not particularly visible from the road, but Canine and Panati hearing both observed that the hooved traveler had strayed off the path. The beat of hooves were still coming closer, though still in a roundabout fashion, not traveling with purpose, but searching. The cynocephalus clamped harder against Andronikos' jaw and silently craned her neck this way and that to get a better angle on the approaching sound. Andronikos desperately wanted to call out. Even if it was some highway bandit and not one of the members of his guild, they'd probably have a brighter future planned for the Panati than his current captor. A muffled cry would probably only anger her without alerting the traveler, and Andronikos remembered what she had told him the night before. Arriving in one piece would net her the best price, but multiple pieces was also acceptable. After an eternity, the unseen travelers seemed to satisfy themselves, and reversed their course back to Reggio. The cynocephalus finally released her grip when she was quite sure that the sound was far enough away. The Panati gasped for air and didn't realize at first that his captor had stalked off to retrieve something from her cache of supplies. He expected it would be a flask of strong drink to calm her nerves, and hoped she might share, so he was all the more shocked to see Greypelt returning to him with a dreadful-looking dirk. "Tell me, Andronikos and Natalie," she waved the blade in front of his face to give him a good look at it as she spoke. "Who in Reggio would miss you if you were gone?" The little Panati gulped audibly. Tied fast to an ancient pillar in the middle of nowhere, he felt truly and completely helpless. Only Drudo could save him now, and he had to believe that one of the Thief Guild's centaurs was returning with news of his location right away, and it occurred to his criminal that his captor had admitted to knowing nothing of Drudo back in the tavern. I'm just a lonely thief," Andronikos pleaded. "I have had buyers, contacts, informants, but no friends here in Reggio. No one that would look beyond the city walls for me, I swear." The grey devil caressed the flat of her dirk upon the Panati's long ears. "I love gnawing on a good pig ear, you know. Just like the humans' domestic dogs, I'm told. I've always wondered how these long, floppy Panati ears would taste. But I've never found a Panati who deserved to be butchered, before now." "Please, what message could I have left? If anyone did miss me, they would think me in hiding, not in danger." Greypelt seemed disappointed by her captive's logical answer and glumly returned her dirk to its sheath. There would only be silence between them from then on. The curious cordiality had completely fled from her canine psyche, and Andronikos was too frightened to rekindle the conversation. She wandered off to double-check the ruins for strategic choke points or defensive weaknesses, though not before commanding her pet to keep a close eye on the Panati while she was away. Thank you for joining me, dear reader. If you'd like to help me out, you can press the like button. Let me know what's on your mind in the comments. And you can buy my books on Amazon. Link in the description. And with any luck, we'll all meet again.